that I've lived in this house for 42 years. Long enough to know how the floorboards sigh when winter settles in and how the pipes rattle like old bones whenever someone takes a shower upstairs. Long enough to remember the smell of my wife's peach cobbler baked in the same oven that now wheezes every time I turn the knob. The house is quiet these days, too quiet sometimes. My wife, Margaret, passed 5 years ago. The radio in the kitchen plays the same jazz station she loved, mostly out of habit. I keep it on low not for the music, but because silence has a weight I can't always bear. Every Sunday, my daughter Claire insists on family dinner. It sounds warm, doesn't it? Like laughter and roast chicken and passing the mashed potatoes. In reality, it's 3 hours of polite interrogation. How I'm eating, if I'm taking my pills, whether I've considered simplifying my living situation. That last phrase is her favorite. I always set the table before they arrive. Margaret's china, white with blue trim, one small crack near the rim of my plate. I like things done properly. The roast had just come out of the oven when I heard their car in the driveway. The deep purr of the Lexus, the slam of the back door, and the familiar sound of my granddaughter Lucy's high heels on the porch. "Grandpa," she called before even stepping inside. Her voice full of that bright cheer young people put on when they're doing something they'd rather not. "In the kitchen, sweetheart," I said. She breezed in, smelling of coconut shampoo and expensive perfume, her phone glued to her hand. 23 years old, business major, permanently half distracted. My daughter followed, hair perfect, smile thin. And behind her came Mark, my son-in-law, already loosening his tie, as if visiting his father-in-law were hard labor. Dinner went smoothly at first. We talked about the weather, Lucy's final exams, Mark's promotion at the firm. I served the roast, the mashed potatoes, the green beans with garlic the way Margaret used to make them. Everyone said the food was great, which is what people say when they're really thinking about something else. Halfway through dessert, store-bought lemon pie that Claire insisted on bringing. Lucy leaned back in her chair and sighed. "You know, Grandpa," she said, fork still in hand, "it's kind of crazy that you still live here all alone." I looked up from my coffee. "Crazy? Well, not crazy," she said quickly, smiling as if that softened it. "Just inefficient. I mean, this is a 4-bedroom house, right? You don't even use half of it." Mark chuckled. "She's been taking some real estate electives," he said. "Now she sees everything as underutilized assets." Lucy rolled her eyes. "It's true. People your age shouldn't own property this big. It's unproductive capital." The words hung in the air like the smell of something burning. My hand froze halfway to my cup. Claire frowned slightly. "Lucy." "What?" Lucy laughed, oblivious. "It's not an insult. It's just economics. There's a housing shortage, and meanwhile, old people are sitting on empty properties. It doesn't make sense." Old people. I watched her sip her wine, the gold bracelet on her wrist catching the light. Probably another gift from her parents bought with the same unproductive capital she was mocking. "So," I said quietly, "what do you suggest I do with my house?" She shrugged, as if the question were silly. "Sell it, obviously. Or, I don't know, pass it down now while you can. Mom and Dad could help manage it better. Invest the money. You could move somewhere easier, like a condo near the lake or one of those senior communities. They have great amenities. Pool tables and bingo nights," Mark added with a smirk. Claire gave a tight smile, clearly torn between embarrassment and agreement. "We're just saying, Dad, it might be time to think about the future. Maintaining this place is a lot of work." I looked around the dining room. The wallpaper Margaret chose in 1983. The clock I'd fixed a dozen times. The framed photo of Lucy as a child, missing her front teeth, holding a dripping popsicle in the backyard. "This house," I said slowly, "has survived 42 winters. I think it'll survive a few more." Lucy laughed again, light and dismissive. "You're so sentimental, Grandpa. Houses are just assets. They don't mean anything." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not quite anger, not yet. Just a cold realization that she meant every word. That to her, the home I built with my hands was just a line item in a future inheritance spreadsheet. When dinner ended, they left quickly. Lucy had a study group. Mark had emails. Claire had to drive. I stood by the doorway as their taillights disappeared into the night. The table was still set, the plates half empty, the smell of lemon pie lingering like an afterthought. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat back down at the head of the table. The house creaked around me, as if listening. Unproductive capital, I muttered under my breath, tasting the words like rust on my tongue. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. I watched the minute hand move once, twice, and whispered to the empty room, maybe it's time they learned what productivity really looks like. The following week passed in that dull gray rhythm all widowers know. Coffee at 6, oatmeal at 7, pills with a glass of tap water that still tastes faintly of iron. Then the long silence of the house, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of a stair settling into age. I tried to read in the mornings, but every few pages, Lucy's voice would replay in my head. People your age shouldn't own property. The arrogance of it. So effortless, so sure of its own logic. I wasn't angry, not exactly. Anger's a young man's sport. What I felt was heavier, like carrying a bag of wet sand you can't set down. On Thursday, I found myself rummaging through the hall closet where Margaret used to keep the paperwork. Old utility bills, mortgage receipts, tax returns neatly labeled in her precise handwriting. She had always been the organized one. A good ledger keeps a good conscience, she'd say, tapping her pen like a judge's gavel. The folders smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. Inside were decades of our lives measured in ink and numbers. The mortgage we'd paid off in 2004, the renovation loan for the kitchen, receipts from when we replaced the roof after Hurricane Andrew's rains nearly tore it apart. As I traced the faded ink of those payments, I remembered how we'd saved every dollar back then, how Margaret used to mend her own dresses, how I'd taken extra shifts at the plant to afford that last $6,000 payoff. We'd earned this house inch by inch, brick by brick. When the kids were young, we couldn't afford much. I built Lucy's mother's first bed out of reclaimed wood. We'd laugh about it later, how it creaked every time she turned. But we managed. We built a life. And now that same daughter had started talking, gently at first, about retirement villages and downsizing. Dad, she'd said last month on the phone, you shouldn't be mowing lawns at your age. What if you fall? What she meant was, what if you fall and make me responsible? That Thursday, while sorting through the papers, I found something that made my fingers go cold. A printed email, an attachment from 3 years ago when I transferred $50,000 to Claire for Lucy's tuition. There were others too. $10,000 for home repairs, $7,500 for a medical emergency. Mark once had that magically coincided with his new motorcycle. $80,000 in total. I'd nearly forgotten. There was another letter too, unopened, wedged behind the folders. From Heritage Title and Escrow, dated last summer. I slid it open with a butter knife. Dear Mr. Henson, as per your daughter Claire's request, we've provided the property valuation for 114 Ridgewood Avenue. The current estimated market value is $940,000. My daughter's request. No mention of me. No copy address. Just her name and email. I sat there a long time with that letter in my lap. The afternoon light coming through the blinds striped the page like prison bars. They were planning something. Maybe not consciously evil, maybe just conveniently selfish. But it was happening. My home had become an opportunity. My age, a weakness to be managed. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap, but it trembled so badly in my hand that I spilled half of it onto the counter. By evening, I'd made up my mind to speak with someone. Not Claire, not Mark. Someone who knew how these things worked. The next day, I walked down the block to see my neighbor, Walter. retired attorney, 79, still sharp enough to quote case law from memory and stubborn enough to shovel his own driveway. We used to drink beer together on his porch back when Margaret was alive. He opened the door in a faded LSU sweatshirt, surprised to see me. "Edward," he said, "you look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I might have," I said, holding up the letter. We sat in his kitchen, the smell of bacon grease clinging to the air. He read the document carefully, adjusting his glasses. When he finished, he looked at me for a long moment. "They're trying to get ahead of you," he said finally, "testing the waters." "For what?" "For when you're too tired to argue." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "I've seen it before. Children think they're protecting you. Then they convince themselves it's for your own good. Next thing you know, your name's off the deed and you're living in a one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat." I exhaled slowly. "What would you do?" Walter smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who still believed in justice. "If you ever decide to give this place away," he said, "make sure it's to someone who deserves it. Someone who won't sell it the next day." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the low hum of his refrigerator. Outside, kids rode bicycles down the street, their laughter carried by the wind. When I left his house, the sun was already dipping behind the maple trees, turning the neighborhood gold. I looked back at my own house from across the street, the chipped white paint, the crooked mailbox, the flower bed Margaret planted that still somehow bloomed every spring. For the first time in years, I didn't just see a home. I saw a weapon, a quiet, legal, devastating weapon. And as I closed my gate behind me, I thought, if they believe I'm too old to own property, they're about to find out how dangerous an old man with a pen can still be. I didn't tell anyone about my visit to Walter. Not Claire, not Lucy, not the mailman who still calls me Chief. From the outside, I kept my usual routine. Grocery shopping on Tuesdays, yard work on Saturdays, an occasional coffee with the widow from across the street who likes to talk about her cats. Inside, however, something in me had shifted. That Sunday Claire called. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the way it gets when she's trying to guide a conversation toward her goal. "Dad, Mark and I were just thinking," she began. "It might be smart to start sorting through the legal stuff. Property, inheritance, all that, before something unexpected happens." Before something unexpected happens. What a neat, polite way to describe death. I kept my tone mild. "That's a responsible idea. What do you suggest?" "Oh, well," she said quickly, relieved I wasn't arguing. "We could meet with a lawyer. Maybe transfer the house into a family trust. That way everything's easier to manage. Fewer taxes, less risk of confusion later." She said, "Manage the way some people say control." "I trust you to find someone reputable," I said. The pause on the other end of the line was long enough for me to imagine her surprise. "You do?" "Of course," I said evenly. "I'm old, remember? People my age shouldn't own property." She gave a nervous little laugh. "Oh, Dad, Lucy didn't mean that seriously. You know how kids are." "Sure," I said. "Find the lawyer. Set the appointment. I'll be there." That night, I took down Margaret's old address book from a bookshelf. Between the faded pages was a card from Green Haven Shelter, the women's refuge where she used to volunteer. I hadn't thought about it in years. I remembered her coming home from shifts there, tired but glowing, telling me about the families who'd escaped violence, about the little boy who kept a rock in his pocket because it was the only thing he owned. She always said, "If we ever have more than we need, Ed, let's give it to someone who doesn't." I used to smile and tell her she was the kind heart of our house. Now sitting there in the dim light of the kitchen, I wondered what she'd think of the way our daughter spoke to me, what she'd think of our granddaughter reducing a lifetime's work to unproductive capital. I picked up the phone and dialed the number from the card. The voice that answered was warm, a little weary. "Green Haven Foundation. This is Marisol." "Marisol," I said, clearing my throat. "My name's Edward Henson." My wife volunteered with your shelter years ago, Margaret Henson. You might not remember her. There was a pause. Of course I do, she said. She used to bring casseroles for the women on Fridays. She was special. She was, I said softly. Listen, I'd like to make a donation. Something substantial. She hesitated, perhaps used to hearing such promises from people who never follow through. What kind of donation, Mr. Henson? A house. The silence that followed was almost comical. I'm sorry, did you say a house? Yes, mine, on Ridgewood Avenue. Oh my God, she whispered. Are you sure? As sure as I've ever been about anything. But there are conditions. Of course. No announcements until the paperwork's signed. No publicity. No press. And it must stay what it is, a home. You can remodel, update, add ramps, or new locks if you must. But no resale, no flipping, no conversions. She promised all of it before she'd even caught her breath. I could hear her writing things down, her pen trembling against the notepad. When I hung up, my hand shook slightly. Not from doubt, but from adrenaline. It was one thing to imagine defiance, another to sign it into reality. The following week, Claire called again with a cheerful efficiency that always makes my teeth ache. We've got an appointment with an attorney, Dad, Wednesday at 2. He's very good, handled our refinancing last year. Wonderful, I said. I'll be there. Walter helped me draw up my own papers in secret. He insisted on using an independent notary, and he made sure every legal phrasing was bulletproof. The beauty of it, he said, adjusting his glasses, is that they'll think they're witnessing one thing when it's another entirely. You sure this will hold up? I asked. Ed, the law's a funny thing. People can manipulate emotions, but not signatures. He grinned. And we'll make sure yours says exactly what you mean. That Wednesday, Claire and Mark arrived early, Lucy in tow. They came dressed like people attending a job interview. Mark in his pressed navy suit, Claire in her favorite cream blazer. Lucy in a dress that probably cost more than my first car. Dad, are you ready? Claire asked, smiling too wide. I've never been readier. We drove together in awkward silence, the kind that buzzes with hidden anticipation. Mark hummed softly to himself. Lucy scrolled through her phone. Claire kept checking a folder of documents in her lap. I looked out the car window at the passing neighborhood. Yards I'd mowed for free when my neighbors were too old to do it themselves. Porches where Margaret used to drop off cookies at Christmas. Each house carried a ghost of some kindness we'd once offered. The attorney's office sat in one of those sleek, modern buildings with glass walls and brushed steel handles. Everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and ambition. A young receptionist led us into a conference room. Mr. Whitaker will be right with you. Mark leaned over and whispered, This will make things so much easier, Ed. You'll see. We'll handle everything for you. I smiled politely, my hand resting on the folder Walter had prepared the night before. 2 minutes later, Mr. Whitaker entered, a smooth man in an expensive gray suit, the kind who looked like he'd never sweated a day in his life. He shook hands all around, then began laying out documents. So, we're here to transfer ownership of the Ridgewood Avenue property, correct? Claire nodded eagerly. Yes, we just need Dad's signature. Everything's ready. Mr. Whitaker adjusted his tie. Excellent. And I've coordinated with the notary you mentioned, Mr. Henson, Mr. Walter Green. He'll be joining us momentarily. Claire blinked. Walter Green? The neighbor? That's right, I said calmly. He's helping me finalize a few additional provisions. Before she could ask what I meant, Walter stepped in, crisp, confident, carrying a thin briefcase. He greeted everyone courteously, but his eyes flicked toward me in silent reassurance. Shall we begin? He said. As they reviewed the documents, I watched my family's expressions shift from relief to confusion. The papers looked legitimate, legal jargon, signatures, notarization lines. But buried in the text, in small print Walter had crafted with surgical precision, was the name of the new deed holder. Greenhaven Foundation. That revelation was still a few minutes away. But as I sat there listening to their shallow laughter and talk of long-term stability, I realized something strange. I wasn't nervous anymore. I was calm, calmer than I'd been in years, because I already knew how the story would end. And for the first time since Margaret died, I was looking forward to seeing someone's jaw drop. It was the way Claire's pen hovered over the page that told me the moment had come. Her fingers were trembling slightly, though she tried to disguise it by clearing her throat and glancing at Mark, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Well, Dad," she said brightly, "it's just this last signature, right here, and then everything will be official." She smiled like a real estate agent closing a deal. Lucy, sitting beside her, had that distracted confidence of someone who believes she's already won. Her phone glowed in her lap, a silent witness. Walter sat across the table, his reading glasses low on his nose, the picture of patient professionalism. Only I saw the faint twitch of amusement in his jaw, the smallest signal that everything was unfolding exactly as planned. "Wait, Mr. Whitaker," the sleek lawyer said, flipping through the last few pages. "Let's confirm the beneficiary's name for the record." He squinted at the text, probably expecting to read Claire Anderson and Mark Anderson, joint trustees. Instead, he paused, his mouth open slightly. This is a foundation?" Claire frowned. "What do you mean a foundation?" Mr. Whitaker hesitated. "The Greenhaven Foundation, to be exact." The silence that fell was thick enough to choke on. Mark blinked, trying to process the words. I'm sorry, what foundation?" Walter folded his hands neatly on the table. "The Greenhaven Foundation is a registered non-profit organization here in the county. Provides shelter for women and children in need." He glanced at me, then back at them. "Mr. Henson has chosen to donate his property to the foundation as a gift in perpetuity." "In perpetuity?" Lucy repeated, her voice rising. Claire looked as if someone had slapped her. "Dad, what is he talking about?" I leaned back in my chair, letting them all look at me. "He's talking about what's written there, sweetheart." That's exactly what I decided. Her face drained of color. "You're donating the house? To strangers?" "They're not strangers," I said quietly. "They're people who need a home, which is more than I can say for the folks sitting at this table." Mark slammed his hand down on the folder. "This is insane. We had an agreement." "We did?" I asked, because I don't recall signing anything that said I owed you my house. "It's not about owing," Claire snapped, her voice cracking. "It's about being practical. You can't manage a property this size. You're not." "Not what?" I said. "Not capable? Not alive enough to decide where my life's work goes." Lucy scoffed. "Grandpa, this isn't fair. You're giving away family property to a bunch of—" "Careful," I said sharply. The word came out like a whip. She froze, surprised. I'd never raised my voice to her before. I continued slowly, deliberately. "Your grandmother volunteered for that shelter. She spent her Friday nights cooking for women who had nowhere to go. That place mattered to her. You wouldn't know that, of course. You were too busy studying business ethics." Lucy opened her mouth, then closed it again. Mark tried a different tactic, the voice of reason. "Ed, listen, you can't make decisions like this under stress. Let's take a day or two, talk to someone impartial. We'll contest this." Walter's tone turned crisp, professional. "You're welcome to try, but the paperwork is airtight, legally witnessed, and recorded as of 30 minutes ago." He tapped the file. "Even if you contest, the deed has been transferred. You're standing in a room arguing about a house that no longer belongs to this family." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "How could you do this to us?" "To you?" I said. "I worked 40 years for this home, paid every tax bill, fixed every leak, mowed every inch of grass. And every time you wanted money, for tuition, for business, for vacations, I gave it. Not once did you ask what I needed. Not once did you visit without a reason. And now you call this betrayal." Her tears turned to anger. "We just wanted to make sure you were safe." "Safe," I repeated. "By selling the roof over my head?" No one spoke. Outside, through the tinted glass walls, I could see the city traffic crawling by. People on their way to lunch, to errands, to anything but this. Lucy's phone buzzed. She didn't look at it. Her eyes were locked on me with something raw and venomous. "You're senile," she whispered. "You don't even know what you're doing." Walter leaned forward, his voice calm but edged with authority. "Careful, young lady. I've spent enough years in court to know the difference between senility and conviction. He knows exactly what he's doing." Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, I believe that concludes our meeting." "Not yet," I said. "There's one more thing." I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a small envelope on the table. Claire stared at it like it might explode. "What's that?" "The key to the house," I said. "It's to be handed over to the foundation director tomorrow morning. They'll start renovations immediately, converting the upstairs bedrooms into family suites, installing ramps, repainting. Margaret's old piano will stay in the living room. They'll use it for music therapy." Claire covered her face with her hands. Lucy muttered something under her breath, something that sounded like unbelievable. Mark just sat there, jaw tight, his knuckles white. "You've made a huge mistake," he said finally. "You'll regret this." I stood up slowly, feeling the ache in my knees, but also something else, something lighter. "I've regretted plenty in my life," I said, "but giving this house to people who'll fill it with life again, that won't be one of them." Walter closed his briefcase and nodded once to me. "We're done here." I walked to the door. The others stayed frozen at the table, staring down at the papers like mourners at a graveside. Just before leaving, I turned back. "Lucy," I said softly. She looked up, wary. "You once said old people shouldn't own property. I suppose now you can sleep easy." "I don't own any." The door shut behind me with a soft click. Outside, the sun was bright enough to make me squint. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky was clear. Walter and I walked side by side to his car. He grinned as he opened the driver's door. "That was one for the books, Ed." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it was just overdue." We stood there a moment, the city noise humming around us. Then I looked back at the glass tower, at the faint shapes of my family still arguing inside. "They'll never forgive you, you know," Walter said quietly. I smiled. "They don't have to." And for the first time in years, I felt completely, beautifully free. The next morning, the house was already awake before me. Workers from Greenhaven arrived just after sunrise, a white van in the driveway, a few young men and women unloading toolboxes, rolls of insulation, and cans of paint. Their voices echoed through the front yard, bright and full of purpose. The air smelled of cut grass and latex primer. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched them work. Their house now looked different already. Alive somehow. There was laughter coming from the kitchen as they measured walls and discussed color palettes. One of them, a woman in a denim jacket, waved when she saw me. "Morning, Mr. Henson." "Morning," I said and meant it. Marisol arrived soon after, the director I'd spoken with on the phone. She was smaller than I expected, her dark hair tied back, her eyes kind but sharp. She carried a clipboard and a thermos that smelled of cinnamon. "Mr. Henson," she said, shaking my hand with both of hers. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," I told her. "Just make good use of it." "We will," she promised. "We already have 3 families waiting. A mother with 2 kids, another woman expecting next month, and a grandmother raising her grandson. We're turning the upstairs bedrooms into small suites for them." "Margaret would have liked that," I said. Marisol smiled. "We found her name in your records. She used to donate every December. I think she'd be proud." I nodded. She always said a house is only as good as the love inside it. I guess we're just putting that to the test. When they left me to rest, I went inside one last time. The house smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, of change. My footsteps echoed differently now, lighter, freer. In the living room, sunlight spilled across Margaret's old piano. Someone had polished it. The top gleamed. For the first time in years, I lifted the lid and pressed a single key. Middle C. The sound was faint, almost shy, but it filled the empty air like a heartbeat. I thought of Lucy then, her face twisted in disbelief. The way she'd looked at me as if I were senile, irrational, ungrateful for their supposed care. I wondered if she'd understand someday. Maybe when she's older. Maybe when she owned something built with her own hands instead of bought with someone else's. By noon, I had packed everything that mattered into 2 suitcases. Clothes, Margaret's wedding ring or photograph, and one of her old cookbooks with grease stains on every other page. I'd already rented a small apartment near the park, 1 bedroom, clean, with a view of the pond and ducks that gather every spring. The kind of place where no one watches the clock on your life. When the movers arrived to take the rest of my things, one of the young men, barely 20, polite, shy, stopped before carrying out a box. "Sir," he said, "this piano. We heard you're leaving it for the shelter. That's really something." I smiled. "It's not much, but it'll sound better when someone else plays it." He nodded. "It already does." That afternoon, I locked the front door for the last time. The brass key was warm in my palm. I turned it slowly, listening to the latch click, a sound I'd heard 10,000 times and would never hear again. Across the street, Walter stood by his porch, pretending to trim his hedges. He waved as I walked down the steps. "All done," he called. "All done," I said. "You all right?" I thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "Better than I've been in a long time." He nodded approvingly. "You know, Ed, most men go their whole lives waiting for justice. You went and wrote your own version." "Couldn't have done it without you," I said. "Nonsense." He grinned. "You just needed a witness." That night in my new apartment, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and looked at the city lights. I could see the faint silhouette of the park in the distance. Children's laughter carrying on the wind. The sound of a dog barking somewhere below. It felt strange not to hear the groan of my old house settling around me, but not painful, just quiet. I checked my email before bed. There was one message from Marisol with the subject line, "They're here." I opened it. Inside were 3 photographs. The first showed a young woman standing in the kitchen, holding her toddler on her hip. The second showed a boy about 8 years old sitting at Margaret's piano, his small hands hovering over the keys. The third was of the front porch, my porch, with a pot of red geraniums on the step and a cardboard sign taped to the railing. It said, "Welcome home." I stared at that picture a long time. The ache in my chest was warm, not sharp, like a scar that finally stopped itching. I thought of Claire and Mark and Lucy, their polished house in the suburbs, their marble countertops and perfect smiles. Maybe they were still angry. Maybe they'd tell themselves I'd lost my mind. That was fine. Let them have their story. I had mine. Before turning in, I wrote a letter, just a short one. No accusations, no bitterness. I left it in my drafts, unsent. But it said what I needed to say. "Claire, you once asked me to think about the future. I finally did. A future isn't built on inheritance. It's built on decency. I hope you and Lucy find some. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. Love, Dad." I closed my laptop and turned off the lamp. The room went still, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Somewhere far away, a child laughed, a sound carried on the night air like a promise. And I thought Margaret would have smiled at that. She would have said I did the right thing. Because in the end, my granddaughter was right about one thing. Old people shouldn't own property, not when they can turn it into something better. Something lasting. A home. It happened 3 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in early June. One of those heavy southern days when the air tastes of rain and cut grass. I was in my little apartment, sitting by the open window with a crossword and a cup of mint tea. My new routine suited me fine. Morning walks by the pond, a chat with the doorman, the comfort of being anonymous. Nobody asked me to sign anything. Nobody checked my blood pressure or my bank balance. The knock came just after 2 o'clock. 3 sharp raps, urgent, familiar. When I opened the door, Claire stood there, her hair frizzed by the humidity, her lipstick smudged. Mark's car idling behind her in the street. Lucy stood a step behind, arms crossed, expression armored. For a second, no one spoke. "Dad," Claire finally said, her voice trembling. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside without answering. The apartment wasn't much, 1 bedroom, narrow kitchen, plain furniture. But it was clean. The air smelled of soap and lemon oil. Claire looked around as if cataloging the poverty. "This is where you live now?" "It is," I said, pouring myself another cup of tea. "Can I offer you some?" She shook her head. Lucy didn't move. Mark must have stayed in the car, too cowardly or too proud to come up. I could see his silhouette through the blinds, fidgeting with his phone. "We stopped by the old house," Claire began carefully. "Or what used to be the house." "Ah." I set my cup down. "How's it looking?" Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. "They've painted it yellow. There's a swing set in the yard. The piano's in the window," and she swallowed hard. "There were children's drawings taped to the walls." "Sounds beautiful," I said. "It was ours," she snapped, then immediately bit her lip, ashamed. "I mean, Mom's. Yours. The family's." I let the silence stretch until she looked away. Families are built by love, not deeds. Lucy's voice cut in colder. "You humiliated us, Grandpa. Everyone's talking. Aunt Karen won't stop asking why you gave away the house to strangers. Do you realize how that makes Mom look? Like someone who expected an inheritance that wasn't hers," I said. Her cheeks flushed. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said softly. "I think it's inevitable." Claire sat down at last, gripping her purse like a lifeline. "Dad, please. We just want to understand. Why didn't you tell us what you were planning?" "Would it have made a difference?" She hesitated. "Maybe." I smiled. "You know, your mother and I used to talk about what we'd leave behind. She always said, if we're lucky, we'll leave kindness. If we're not, we'll leave an argument. I suppose I left both." Lucy looked disgusted. "So that's it? You gave away everything because Grandma liked volunteering." I met her eyes. "No, I gave it away because you didn't." She stared at me, speechless for once. Claire covered her face with her hands. "We were worried about you, Dad. That's all." I nodded slowly. "I know. Worried I'd fall. Worried I'd forget. Worried I'd live too long and spend too much. That's not fair." "It's perfectly fair," I said. "You see, I finally understood that you didn't want me to have a home. You wanted me to have a place convenient for you. Somewhere you could store me, like old furniture, until you decided what to do with it." Claire started to protest, but I lifted a hand. "It's all right. I'm not angry anymore. Anger's heavy. I gave that away too." They both fell silent. Outside, a church bell rang somewhere down the street, slow and deliberate. Finally, Lucy muttered, "You know what people are saying online? They call you the old man who gave away his mansion. Some even say it was a publicity stunt." I chuckled. "Good. Maybe it'll make 1 or 2 of them think before they treat their elders like expired credit cards." Claire stood abruptly. "Come, Luce, let's go." But before she reached the door, she paused. "Dad," her voice softened. "You don't hate us, do you?" I looked at her for a long moment. She looked so small suddenly. Her confidence drained. The little girl who used to run barefoot through the backyard with scraped knees. "No," I said quietly. "I don't hate you. I just finally love myself enough to stop being used." She nodded once, her eyes glistening. "Goodbye, Dad." "Goodbye, Claire." They left without another word. The sound of the car engine faded down the street, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. I stood by the window for a while, watching the light shift through the leaves. A soft breeze carried the smell of rain and something faintly sweet, honeysuckle maybe. Later that evening, I took a walk to Ridgewood Avenue. The new paint gleamed under the sunset, the swing set creaked, and laughter floated from the open windows. I stood across the street, half hidden behind the maple tree, and listened. A woman was singing softly inside, off-key, but joyful. A little boy ran out the front door, barefoot, holding a toy airplane, his laughter high and wild. He spotted me and waved. "Hi, mister." I raised my hand in return. "Hi there." "Do you live here?" he asked. "Not anymore," I said, "but I used to." He smiled. "It's a nice house." "It is," I agreed. "Keep it that way." Then I turned and walked back toward the setting sun, the pavement warm beneath my shoes, the world suddenly wide open again. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an old man guarding walls. I felt like a man who had finally stepped outside them. And as the street lights flickered on, I whispered to the wind, to Margaret, to whoever might still be listening. They wanted my house. I smiled. I gave them a lesson instead. 2 weeks after that visit, a letter arrived, handwritten, with my daughter's familiar slanted script on the envelope. The paper was thick, the kind of expensive stationer people buy when they want their words to look more serious than they feel. I let it sit unopened on the kitchen table for a day, then another. I'd spent a lifetime reacting too quickly to bills, to requests, to guilt. I wanted this one to wait. Let her impatience hang in the air for once. On the third morning, I finally slit the envelope open with my butter knife. "Dad, I don't know where to begin. The truth is, you're right. We were thinking about convenience, about control, about money, if I'm honest. I can see that now, and I'm ashamed. Mark and I have been fighting about it. Lucy barely speaks to me. She says you ruined our family name. But deep down, I think she's angry because you made her see herself for who she is." I went back to the house again, or what used to be our house. I stood across the street, like you must have, and I watched. There were children playing in the yard, and a woman sitting on the porch steps, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. They look safe, happy. You were right, Dad. It's more of a home now than it ever was with us. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand. Love, Claire. A small photo fell from the envelope, a snapshot clearly taken on her phone. It showed the house bathed in golden evening light, the yellow paint glowing. Someone had added a wooden sign above the porch. The Henson home. Hope lives here. I stared at it until my eyes stung. I didn't realize I was smiling until I felt the muscles ache. That weekend, I took the bus downtown to visit the shelter myself. I hadn't planned to go. I didn't want thanks or ceremony. But something in Claire's letter tugged at me. Maybe I wanted to see it alive, to confirm that I hadn't been foolish after all. When I arrived, the garden Margaret planted was in full bloom. The roses she'd coaxed from dry soil now stood high and proud. The swing set creaked under the weight of 2 laughing children. The front door had been painted blue, the same shade Margaret loved. Marisol met me at the gate. "Mr. Henson," she said, genuinely surprised. "We didn't expect you." "I didn't expect myself either," I said with a chuckle. She led me inside. The living room was different but familiar. The same bones, the same sunlight filtering through the curtains. But the energy had changed. There were toys on the rug, drawings taped to the fridge, the smell of lentil soup simmering in the kitchen. And in the corner, the piano. A teenage girl sat there, picking out a slow, halting melody, something gentle, uncertain, like someone remembering a song they once knew. "That's Maria," Marisol whispered. "She just turned 15. Lost her father last year. She plays every afternoon. Maria looked up shyly when she noticed me. You're the man who gave us this place, right? I hesitated, then nodded. I suppose I am. She smiled, small but real. My mom says this house saved her. She says God must have sent you. I looked at the ceiling, at the faded spot where Margaret's chandelier once hung. Your mom gives God too much credit, I said softly. Maria laughed, her fingers still moving across the keys. The sound filled the room, not perfect, not polished, but warm, human. Afterward, Marisol walked me out. You know, she said, we're naming the new children's wing after your wife. The Margaret Henson room. Would that be all right? I swallowed hard. She'd like that? I said. She always wanted a house full of laughter. When I got back to my apartment, I found another envelope waiting in the mailbox, smaller this time, cheap paper. The handwriting uneven. Inside was a note from Lucy. Grandpa, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I still don't understand everything, but I think you did what you believed was right. Mom told me about the shelter. Maybe I'll visit someday. Maybe I'll even volunteer. I'm not promising anything yet, but maybe. I hope you're doing okay, Lucy. The words were clumsy, reluctant, but they were hers. It was the first time she'd written to me without asking for something. That alone was worth more than any inheritance. I placed both letters side by side on the table, poured myself a glass of water, and raised it like a toast. To Margaret, I said quietly, you were right. Love doesn't disappear, it just changes hands. Outside, the sky was turning pink, and somewhere in the distance I thought I heard a piano, or maybe I imagined it. I sat by the window until the light faded. The park below glowed with fireflies, and laughter drifted up from the street. For once, I didn't feel like a man at the end of something. I felt like the beginning of someone else's piece. And maybe that's what getting old really means. Learning to stop guarding what's yours and start giving what lasts. I looked again at the photograph of the yellow house, the sign over the porch shining faintly in the dusk. The Henson home. Hope lives here. And I thought, yes, it does. Then I turned off the light, the faint hum of the city filling the room, and whispered one last thing to the dark. They said old people shouldn't own property. I smiled to myself. Good thing I gave mine to the future.